Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Rose Hill, and I am so happy to be here with you this evening and to finally, this is the first time that we have had the opportunity to discuss Hannah Arendt's poems, which appeared in the world in December 2024. So Genese is holding up a copy of the book. So I think, I'm not going to introduce myself. I hate introductions personally, but I am going to introduce Genese, who is an artist, a poet, I'm adding that one, a writer, a translator, and a scholar who lives in Burlington, Vermont. She's the author of many books, and she is the translator of Robert Musil's Thought Flights and the author of The World as Metaphor in Robert Musil's The Man Without Qualities. And she is currently writing a biography of Musil and sharing all of her research and the ephemera and thoughts on her Substack, Attempts to Find Musil, which I encourage you to subscribe to and follow if you don't. She's one of those rare people who expand the world whenever you speak with her, and she makes life feel larger and more meaningful. And this process has been nothing but a real joy for me. And I'm going to say a little bit about it, and then I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm going to stop talking. But I found Hannah Arendt's poems in the archive in 2010, 2011, when I was doing research for my dissertation. And I did not know that she wrote poems. This was before the Danktaga book was published as a collection of her notebooks. And the end of the papers, the end of the finding aid, there was a box of poems and short stories. I was like, what? What are these? Maybe they're her husband's. And I opened this folder, and she had self-bound 2 small volumes of poems. And she had taken them with her when she fled Germany in 1933 and carried them with her. And when she arrived in New York between 1942, she arrived on May 22nd, 1941. Between that time, 1942 through the 1950s, she edited the poems and collected them and self-bound them into these 2 volumes that she left to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. The rest of the poems, so once I found the poems, I went on a search for more poems. And I went to the New York Public Library and the German Literature Archive in Marbach, Germany, which is where Hannah Arendt had left her notebooks, which is where the remainder of the poems come from. So there's a 16-year gap in the poems between 1933 and she flees in 33. The last poem is 26, between 1926 and 1942. And the first poem that she writes after that gap is for Walter Benjamin after she goes to try to find his grave. So I wanted to do something with the poems, and I took them, I collected them, I organized them, I took them back to Amherst, Massachusetts, and I showed them to my dissertation advisor. And he said, I didn't know she wrote poems, and are they any good? And I said, well, I don't know. And I wrote to Jerry Cohn, who's no longer with us, may he rest in peace. But I wrote to him, and I said, can I have it? I said, can I do this project? Can I make a book of Hannah Arendt's poems? Can I translate the poems? And he wrote me back almost immediately, which he always did. And he wrote a beautiful email. And he said, yes, I love the poems, but, and I don't advise anybody do what I did here. He said, but you can't just read Hannah Arendt's poems in the tradition of Emily Dickinson or W.H. Auden. You have to know Hölderlin and Schiller and Goethe. You have to study the German Romantic poets. So I went to Heidelberg for 2.5 years to study German Romantic poetry and to take translation classes at Hannah Arendt's alma mater, where she had done her dissertation. This was a very long research process for me of fully submerging myself, trying to submerge myself in that world that she once inhabited. There, and so then I went through the first pass of a rough translation, and with my translation professor, and eventually the book was sold to actually a different publisher, to Bloomsbury. And then one day, oh, there's a beautiful bluebird sitting right at the window now. Sorry. And one day my phone actually rang. I was in my office at Bard, and an editor from Norton called me and said, "We want it." So then we had a long conversation, and I began what became a 2-year search to find the right person to take on this project. And we share a mutual friend, Rebecca Ariel Port, who is a colleague of mine at the Brooklyn Institute and a beautiful soul. And we were having a conversation, I think right as the pandemic was starting. I think we were on the phone. I was walking around my backyard, and she said, "I have the person for you." And she did. And so that is how this collaboration began to come into being. And it was really, I mean, when I think about those endless hours of meetings on Zoom that we had during the pandemic, I think of us laughing most of the time. I think of our rolling our eyes at Hannah, and "Oi, Hannah, really?" and "Oh my God, Heidegger sex poems," and like, what is this? What's happening here? So this was a really joyful, I just feel really lucky, honestly. And this book would not be what it is, and it would not be as beautiful as it is. And I don't think it would have touched as many people as it's touching right now without your hand and your poetic sensibility and the work that you brought to this translation. So I'm going to stop talking, and I would like to give you the floor to maybe share what was the experience like for you, being suddenly pulled into the world of Arendt mania and the world of Arendt's poems as a professional translator, as a professional thinker and poet and scholar and woman.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. And the thing is, Sam doesn't need any introduction because we all know how amazing she is. And I was, you know, incredibly honored to be asked to do this. And even though I have been translating for about 15 years or so, up until the time we started, or 13, I'd never done a co-translation with anyone. Um, and I've done very little poetry translation as well. But I had been translating just almost exclusively one person, Robert Musil. I've done some other ones. But when I got together with Sam, who knows Arendt so deeply and and she's lived within Arendt and in the milieu, and as you hear, studied her for so long, that I came into it, just, and also she'd been working on the poems already for years before I came, stumbling in. And I think that at first I just came in and, I knew something about Arendt and I admired her and I read some of her work, but I didn't know her well enough to really know what the poems. I guess what I want to say is I think that there's a difference between just coming to the text, a huge difference between just coming to a text and coming to a text of somebody whose work you know. And so, as an example, Sam knows what Arendt means when she uses a certain word. She knows. There were certain times when Sam would say to me, "Oh, I'd had to do a translation." She said, "Arendt would never use that word," you know, and she knew that, and so so my first pass was to kind of do almost a literal translation, and that included, well, it's a little bit of a contradiction in terms, but keeping the rhymes often, um, but without necessarily understanding them. And we talked a little bit before we opened up at 8 about how the idea that, translating is I think, the deepest kind of reading, because you have to think really hard about something that you might just kind of skim over if you were reading it. But co-translating, I'd say, is an even deeper form of reading, because we went over and over and over the poems. And as we did so, we would understand them. And sometimes been going over a poem for weeks or months, and we suddenly, I don't know what this means. What does this word mean? What does this phrase mean? And we'd have to really think about it. Um, without, there's the other danger of translating, that if you know too much, you'll make it too explicit. So, we didn't want to make it explicit, but you do have to at least hopefully try to understand, so that you can render it in a new way. And yes, there was a lot of laughing. And we did a lot of, we did Bob Dylan versions and Leonard Cohen versions of a lot of the poems as well.
Were there any poems that really surprised you? I mean, I think there were some that we really wrestled with and struggled with, and just after like 4 hours of talking about like 4 lines, would say, okay, let's just forget it for a bit and come back to it because it's not making sense. It's not working. There's something that, and I mean, there's like clear lines that stand out to me where it was just, I feel like hours and weeks were spent on some of these lines. Were there any for you that you're carrying still, that you're thinking about, or any that really surprised you? Did you learn anything about Hannah Arendt?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that, and I also had just read Sam's wonderful biography, which did give me a really wonderful feeling of what I learned deeper when I got into the poems and discussing the poems. It was about her incredible love of life and sort of, earthiness and, amor mundi, love of the world, the absolute commitment to loving the world in spite of pain. And you see that in the poems over and over again, the embrace of darkness and shadow, and but the finding the light in there. Yeah, and yeah, obviously some of the lines are absolutely untranslatable, and
Do you want to, should we look at a couple of them?
yeah.
So I asked the question, which poems do you want to retranslate? And,
Oh,
and we picked two, but maybe first let's I want to share with you we'll look at the actual typescript from the archive to show you where we started from point zero. And this was an interesting process because I felt like there were endless typos in typing them up. There would be a comma or a, a misspelt word, or something would have been missing. So this is the first poem. You get a sense of, can you see it? You can get a sense of Arendt's typewriter too, which is nice. There's a real, I think, kind of tactile quality. Here. And then I'm gonna go down, and you can see some were handwritten, And then she would type them up from these handshrift copies. And you can see this is how this was added actually by the archive because of the order of the papers and the way they can get shuffled in folders. But 1925, winter 1925, 1926. It's interesting to see how her hand kind of falls down the page here. At some point, like 10 years ago, I put together a sheet of Arendt's characters, which helped to begin to learn how to read her writing. So this is one poem that Denise picked. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually know that the assignment was one that we wanted to redo. I thought it was just one that I liked.
Yeah, it was one that you
So
liked. Yeah, yeah,
I think we did really well, pretty well with this one, but
yeah.
I like the translation, but um we needed not only to think about Arendt, but we needed to think about Plato and Plato's. So it's about, you know, Plato's doctrine of the soul. And I guess Sam said that she added that Arendt added the parentheses later. So I was wondering about this the other day. What would we have done if that hadn't been there? Would we have known?
Uh, if it
And
had
would
just
we have?
been Centaur.
Yeah. Um, but
When I was pulling this up, I think I had forgotten that it shared a page with these other two
Mhm.
short poems, which also adds, I think, a bit of interesting context. So it's Plato's Doctrine of the Soul from the Phaedrus. And it's just a really strange reading of the Phaedrus. Like there's no there's there's kind of no way around it. Do you want to read it?
Ja, sure. So, Kentor, apropos Platos Seelenlehre, reite über die Erde hin zu den Rändern der Weite, bis dein menschlicher Rücken sich fügt in die tierischen Schenkel, umflügle gebändigt in dir die Erde der Menschen und Rosse, denen alles die Herrschaft verdirbt, trabend doch wie im Flüge, gestreckt von Gesicht zu den Schenkeln, sei ihnen die ältere Einheit von Mensch und Tier. Yeah. And so, you know, we had to sort of think about, well, in the doctrine of the soul, Socrates tells the story of the soul being like a chariot with two horses that are pulling him in different directions. One is pulling the charioteer up towards the higher, you know, the divine and the unearthly, and the other one is pulling him down to the you know, to the animalistic. But what Arendt, I think, seems to do in here is, in a sort of, I think, characteristic way, favor the earthly and merge the animal and the human. I don't know. I mean, maybe we should look at the
Yeah.
translations, but
Do you want to share
yeah,
the
I
sheet?
have I did let me see, how do I, let's see, I have to share. Sharing is not turned on.
Oh no. Okay. I can fix that.
Okay, I'm sure you can.
I fixed
Okay.
it.
I went back and I looked at where is it? Went back to and looked at some older translations, older ones that we did, and I'm sure there are other ones as well. But so I kind of went stanza by stanza to just sort of look at the first one that's in italics is was an early, or it's a couple of early versions merged together. So we had ride over the earth up to the edges of the world, or towards the edges of the world, until your human back fuses with animal shanks. We also at one point had until your human back yields to animal thighs. Our final translation, although we just earlier said that we don't really feel that any of the translations are final, was ride over the earth up to the edges of the world until your human back fuses with animal thighs. So I mean, this stanza wasn't that difficult, but the next one was more difficult. So Umflügle gebändigt in dir. So, you know, we had fly self-restraining, or with tamed wings fly over, or fly around self-mastering, or fly yourself reined in over. And I think, you know, one of the things that I really learned after months and months of working on these was something that I've been trying to learn with all translation, but with poetry particularly, is that you really, really sometimes have to just write it over.
Yeah.
You really can't stay too close to it. So we did that often. But so fly self-restraining, and then the earth of men and steeds, that was simple, but the last line, denen alles die Herrschaft verdirbt, for whom mastery ruins everything, or who are destroyed if mastered, or where mastery destroys all, or for whom reign spoils everything. Now, I got very upset for a while because I wasn't sure what the subject was of the sentence. Was it mastery destroying everything, or was it everything destroying mastery? But we decided that it had to be mastery destroying everything or everyone.
And Herrschaft for Arendt is you know, she's writing this, and this, I think this poem was 1953, and the so Origins is published in 1951, and the German translation of Origins for Arendt is, you know, the Ursprung totale Herrschaft. And so for me, it was always hard not to hear that word in the context of domination, of total, what she defined as total domination.
And I think we had the word domination there once too.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I mean, for Plato would be more on the side of wanting you to be, you know, mastering yourself, and but in this, I don't know, it's still not really clear to me, because the earth the animals and the men, the humans and the horses are destroyed by mastery, and yet the speaker is saying, you know, fly mastered in yourself. What do you think, Sam?
Well, I think that's really, I mean, so there's two things that just hearing you talk about it, that one I'm feeling and one I'm thinking, you know, I like that you emphasized, you know, Arendt's always bringing us back to the earthly, to the material, and that's really felt in the language. And you know, in that line, I remember, like, I have very tactile memory of, like, up to the edges of the world. I know where I was sitting on my couch and like what time of day it was, like going over it, because that word also means borders and edges, and there's this kind of sense of almost like you're transversing and roundness there too. And then it's coming back. So it's a strange reading. She's kind of maybe turning the total domination over in Plato's doctrine of the soul. So I'm thinking about what you just said now in relationship to the poem that's at the top of the typescript, which is Dicht, verdichtet, das Gedicht. And so, Schutz denken for Bosensinnen, Schale, wenn der Kern dir spricht, weiß der Welt eigentlich des Ihnen. So it's that inner core. How can we protect that inner core? How can we, and that's a different kind of mastery of oneself than what she's at and I think in opposition to any notion of like
So there
authenticity.
are two kinds of mastery in that one stanza.
Yeah. Say more.
Yeah, well, let's go to the next one. So we
Okay.
ended up with
Yeah.
so we really changed the order.
Yes.
With tamed wings fly over the earth of men and steeds, for whom mastery ruins everything. I mean, maybe.
There's a sense of tucking in, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's, before flying too.
And maybe the next stanza, the tamedness will turn into wildness. Right? So, traben doch wie Flüge. Okay, so trot, we had but as if in flight, stretched out from face to flank. Oh, this was a really older way of doing the last two lines there. They appear in their old unity of man and animal, which, but it's a command. Be to them the old unity, or the older unity. So we ended up with trot as if in flight, stretched out from face to flank. Be for them the ancient union of man and animal. And so, what I was thinking when I looked at this earlier today, where's the divine?
Yeah.
Except in the capital D's in the deer, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean, Arendt didn't believe in the soul or the
Oh,
divine in
yeah.
any transcendental sense, but I think the idea is that I think that in oneself, the old unity, the union in oneself between the animalistic and the man of reason, the logos,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a sense that there's that sense of self-mastery. And I'm thinking now of the line from the early, I think it's, no, I can't remember, it's earlier or later where I think it's a bit earlier where she says, for whom self-mastery is knowledge and right,
Yeah.
whose foot only stomps where it's meant to.
Yeah, and that points out another really important thing about this process is that the poems were, our understanding of the poems was informed by the other poems, and
Very much so.
yeah.
Yeah. I like this poem. I think of this poem next to the poem about Goethe and
Mhm.
the theory of colors. There are kind of two philosophical poems in the book that are playing with philosophical ideas. But I think this poem, along with many of the others in the book, captures Arendt's own kind of existential grappling with finding that sense of inner meaning in life and purpose, that kind of inner core that she comes back to in different ways. Um, this, I mean, I remember the the kind of some of these lines where, realizing that we had to flip them around was often a way to change it. I was curious if you want to say more about some of the struggles that we had with choosing to adopt or abandon the rhyme schemes. I have this really nice memory of you saying to me something like, Samantha, rhyme can be a vehicle for meaning. And I was like, I hate rhyme. We're not doing any rhymes. There will be no rhyming in this collection. And you're like, okay, let's talk about it. So
Yeah,
you,
it was
yeah.
it was a tension, but I think all of the tensions, I think maybe I don't know if you wrote it in the introduction or it was just something we talked about, but that we sort of curbed each other's tendencies in a nice way. So, I would tend to be, go more to the like lyrical, poetic, sentimental, and you would tend to be, and in the end, I think the last edit through, you were very um spare. And I realized that I liked it, and it was every translation is the translation. It's, this is, you know, our Arendt, when I do mine, it's my version. And but it's with Sam, I have to always defer to her because she, ultimately because I argued about a lot of little things and a lot of little words like stigmata. Remember that was a big one.
Oh,
Um, but but she, her instinct is informed and is rich, and I didn't know what I was doing, you know.
well, I mean, that's not true. I think they're really, I think what you said at the beginning about, somehow, knowing maybe a little too much becomes a way to delimit my own ability to experience the poems. I mean, I had so much fun writing the footnotes because I got to kind of do that detective work of what the reference is or what letter it was included in. I had someone in Heidelberg a couple of weeks ago come up to me and say, "Do you know why she's like?" She always talks about the heart, which I hadn't noticed in the poems as having chambers, because that's how Germans conceptualize.
Aha.
You have rooms in your heart that get peopled.
Okay.
And there are things that I feel like that I still learn from them, but I feel like the gift for me was that you helped me see this fresh, that it was new because it was yours, in the translations that we're bringing in. And I think I personally tend towards spareness in my own prose style. um I think I like to leave room.
Yeah, and I tend to the other, and I need to be curbed. It's
Checks and balances.
yeah. And I think the other poem that we were looking at,
Yes.
I think did have rhyme, and we can see the rhyming versions and then how getting see the thing about a rhyme when you're writing a poem is that it can help you find fresh images that you wouldn't have found otherwise. But when you're translating it, it can be really forced. And that's dangerous, and you start adding words and changing things just for the rhyme. But and it's, we're not, it's different than when you're writing it. Um,
Yeah.
so
And I mean, some of the first, poems were written between the ages of like 18 and 21 or 22. And she is engaging, I think, in a bit of mimicry
yeah,
of imitation. I mean, the poem that drove me, we can look at Abschied, but the poem that drove me insane more than any other poem was, I think it's the second poem in the
yeah,
tune of a folk song, which just kills me every time I read it, because I felt like I couldn't make it beautiful.
yeah. And there were a number of other ones that in the original we didn't like, I think, as much as we liked them in our version.
Yes.
So, and the other way around as well. Obviously, there's some that are so beautiful in the original, and we couldn't get them quite. Um, so
No.
I think this poem, I just want to say that this is really different than most of the poems in the book. And you're right to, compare it with the Goethe one, but yeah, it's much more, well, it's very, very strongly imagistic, but it's not directly personal. So,
Which is what sets it apart, because most of them are.
yeah.
Most of them are kind of snapshots, records, or memories of an experience or an event, and there's not a lot of imagery in the collection, I would say.
Wow.
Um, in terms of, this style of poem, where I think it's interesting that this is on the same page when she typed it up as the Dichtgedicht poem.
Dicht verdichtet.
Yeah.
Das Gedicht. Yeah. And it is, it's dense and it's potent and small and powerful, I think.
Yeah, which is kind of how, there's the other poem where she says, I am no more than a little.
I love that one. I almost picked that one.
I love that one too. That one came late to us.
I know. Found it at the last minute.
Yeah. Yeah, it also it reminds me, maybe I would put it also with the Ich weiß, dass die Straße gestürzt poem.
Mhm. Yeah.
Those lines about the horse's hooves,
Right.
that the marks on the moon resemble the hoof prints of the horse.
Yeah, that's another one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have control over the screen share, so I
Okay,
can't.
so do you want to look at the other one?
Yeah, let's look at the other one. This one drove me insane too, but it's also
Yeah.
a bit mystical almost.
Yeah.
It's a fun one. An early one too.
So it rhymes more, much more, and it rhymes from one stanza to the other. But we got rid of almost all the rhymes ultimately, but so it's Abschied. Used to call it farewell, and in the end we call it parting. And the first stanza goes, Nun lasst mich, o schwebende Tage, die Hände euch reichen. Ihr entflieht mir nicht, es gibt kein Entweichen ins Leere und Seitenlose. Doch legt eines glühenden Windes fremderes Zeichen sein Wehen um mich. Ich will nicht entweichen in die Leere gehemmter Zeiten. Ach, ihr kanntet das Lächeln, mit dem ich mich schenkte. Ihr wusstet, wie vieles ich schweigend verhängte, um auf Wiesen zu liegen und euch zu gehören. Doch jetzt ruft das Blut, das nimmer verdrängte, hinaus mich auf Schiffe, die niemals ich lenkte. Der Tod ist im Leben, ich weiß, ich weiß. So lasst mich, o schwebende Tage, die Hände euch reichen. Ihr verliert mich nicht, ich lasse euch zum Zeichen dies Blatt und die Flamme zurück.
Um, if you,
Did I skip something?
no.
Okay.
But if you want for fun, I pulled up my first ever translation
Oh,
of this
great.
poem. So
I
you
was
can.
wishing that I had those when I,
Yeah, I don't know.
reviewed.
I mean, maybe at some point I had sent them to you. I think you have to give me screen share
Yes.
back so I can show it to you, and then we can go back and look at the changes that we made. Maybe fun.
Stop share. Okay. And there's a chat, I think. Ah, my heart has more rooms than a whorehouse. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Excellent. Yeah.
If you go to the three buttons, you can make me the host again.
Oh, 3 buttons at more.
On my face.
Oh, 3 buttons on your face. Sorry, I don't see any buttons on your face. Oh, there, I see. Oh, yes, okay. Did that work? Did that do it? No. All right. Ah, okay, I'm getting there. Make host. Yes.
I don't know how to make two people the host simultaneously. I don't know how to
Excellent.
co-host. So the book was not originally, I'm going to pull this up. You're going to see the original title of the book. The book was originally not titled What Remains, which is a reference to a couple of different, it means a couple of different things to me. I'm sure it means different, and some is similar in different things for Genese, but it was originally titled, I just had given it the title, Into the Dark, which is the first poem, and it's also one of the most repeated phrases in the book. I prefer What Remains, but this is the first ever translation that I made of this particular poem, which we can see the differences between the finalized version, and then it was interesting in the conversation, like what had come back to me from memory, because I had memorized my translations. And so sometimes talking through them, I think it was part of what was challenging for me was letting go of what my mouth automatically wanted to fill in as we were reading. And so
It's not that different.
it's not, I guess it's not horribly different, but I feel like there are a couple of important differences in it as well that we made, and we went back and forth, especially on those first few lines. I mean, the work that the commas are doing in here are also, it felt like moving around different corners. So we started with vanishing days, exclamation mark, give me your hands, which is different than now let me, hovering days, give you my hands. And I think the tone of the poem is radically different in the way that we ultimately translated it, because it's much more of the imperative, taking charge, like the Arendt strong voice. And the way I had initially set it up was very almost kind of passive, instead of taking charge. Do you want to pull the document back up and we can take a look at the editorial changes?
Yep.
So
you have to share with me back, I think. Okay.
All yours.
You got it. Okay. Where'd it go? Okay. I'll do the rhyming one. Oh, where's the rhyming one? Oh, this is the wrong document. Let's see. It's supposed to be this one. Okay. So the rhyming one that I did first, I think, is allow me, oh hovering days, to offer you my hands. You shan't flee me. Obviously not, you shan't
that
flee
would have been me yelling at this point in the conversation, like, what? No.
There'll be no escape into lands, into void and and timelessness, or there'll be no escape into lands of void and timelessness. But a stranger's sign surrounds me with bands of a fervent wind. I will not escape to those lands, that void of inhibited times. You knew the smile with which I gave myself then. How many to silence I condemned, just to lie in the meadows and give myself to you. But now the never suppressed, the never stilled blood calls me to board ships I never steered on any sea. Death is in living, I know. So let me, oh hovering days, give you my hands. You have not lost me. I'll leave for you a sign, this page, and a flame behind. So that was the rhyming version, but then we went through lots of other things, cutting the rhymes, and strangely, got really back pretty close to what Sam had originally had, I think. Oh, vanishing days, give me your hands. You cannot escape me. There will be no release.
I think you have to scroll so we can see it with you. Sorry.
Oh, it's right. Okay, so
or it's still on the alternate translations, not the other page.
Oh no, it's not a full translation. This one here is our translation. I just did it stanza by stanza.
Okay, sorry.
No, I know it's weird. But so, oh, vanishing days, exclamation point. which we added, give me your hands, period. You cannot escape me. There will be no release into that void of infinite time. And now we're over here. This was really, we got to, even if a wind, hot and strange, warns me away, I will not release you into the void of finite time. And I think that was, definitely we extrapolated because
We still can't see what I have the document on
you
my own
don't see
computer, but
this is the
no, I think because you
this
pulled
is
up
the one.
your open Word doc, which says alternate translations at the top.
Oh, no, it's the wrong, it's so yeah, it should be a one that says, okay, I'm sorry,
That's
okay,
okay.
I messed up.
No, no, no.
How do I, okay, stop share and share a different thing.
This is what happens when bookish people have to deal with technology. I'm the
Oh,
same way.
oh.
Yes.
Translation examples,
Yeah.
that's it. Share. Thank you. Okay, so I've highlighted this in yellow here in the original is doch legt ein glühenden Windes fremderes Zeichen sein Wehen mich. So we'd originally, you said, but a fervent wind blows a stranger sign, or but a stranger sign blows around me. But then we somehow got to this idea that really it was we could say it this way, even if a wind, hot and strange, warns me away, I will not release you into the void of finite time. And we added that
Yeah.
it's not necessarily there. It could be, I will not drift away into the void of finite time, but we added the you, and I think, we felt it was justified for some reason.
I love this next stanza. I love where we landed on it.
Me too. So this one, and I mean, I guess we sort of felt that this was a Heidegger love poem. And so this stanza, it would be, about the secrecy of their affair. And so, you knew the smile. These were some of the early ones. You knew the smile as I gave myself then, or you knew the smile with which I gave myself then, or with which I gave myself. Um, and then we ended up, oh, you knew the smile with which I gave myself to you. You knew how much I had to keep secret. We'd had before how many to silence I'd condemned or how many I'd sentenced to silence. But then we just, we simplified it. You knew how much I had to keep secret just to lie in the meadows and be with you.
It's very tender.
It is. And so then, but now the blood and some earlier versions, now the blood no longer ignored, or the never suppressed blood, or the never stilled blood calls me to ships or to board ships I never steered. That, I guess the idea is that, new ships, new lovers. And then this last line, death is in life. I know, I know. And then the ending, so let me, so we had, so let me, oh hovering days, take your hands in mine, or give you my hands, or you have not lost me, I'll leave for you a sign. And but the last one, we changed the hovering to vanishing.
Mhm.
Oh, vanishing days, give me your hands. You cannot lose me. I will leave you a sign. And then we added a colon. I'll leave you a sign, this page in a flame behind. You'll see, if you look at the German, it says, I leave to you as a sign this page and, and the flame.
Which is what Heidegger used to do to make to organize his meetings with Hannah. He would, in the German Literature Archive, he would write her a little note that would have the time that he would come by if there was a light in the window. and he would fold the paper so that it was almost like origami and, slip it under her door so nobody could see who it was from. It was always like MH. But it was a page and a flame, quite literally, was how they would know whether or not they were going to see one another that evening.
But you know what occurs to me just now for the first time?
Oh no, what?
No, it's nothing
Oh,
that we
good.
did. A page and a flame. What happens when you have a page and you put it in a flame?
Yeah.
So is she saying she's going to burn all the letters? I mean, it's not. I mean,
Well, he burnt hers, but I think that's it. I think she's turning it upside down. She's turning their sign into a I'm leaving you. And this is a breakup poem, right? She breaks up with him in the summer of 1925. We can follow the breakup through the poems, the separation. Yeah, no, I like that. I think she is turning it inside out. She's taking their sign and saying, that's all I'm gonna leave for you. That's it.
yeah, and if you want to use the flame to burn the letters,
Yeah,
then go ahead. But I'm gonna, you're not gonna lose me. You can't possibly lose me. I'm always sort of there, somewhat there, and that comes up in a lot of the love poems with him.
does curse.
Like that one.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, the separation. I think this was an incredibly difficult poem for me. I think both because it wasn't very easy to translate. It also, I mean, there were obviously a lot of choices that we made. Um, and it's also it often to me felt like a kind of a transgression, a violation to be not just reading these poems that she had written for Heidegger when she was quite young, but to be translating them into English felt a bit like a violation to me. Not violence, but a kind of a kind of transgression. And this was one that I really that I think comes back to me kind of almost as an ethical concern, the kind of ethics of translation and what are we doing when we make something like this available in a new way or open it. I guess open. I'm thinking of like opening a kind of window into their romance that otherwise was held in the archive in their shared Muttersprache in in secrecy. Do we want to open it up for some conversation?
Yes, definitely.
Um, you can make me host or not host. It's okay. Does
I don't
anyone
know.
any
I
questions?
know how to do it better.
If not, that's yeah, Mike, go for it.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. This is fascinating. Um, just hearing your thought processes behind the translation is fascinating to me because I've always wondered about that process. And one of the things comes to mind for you as authors and as translators, when you're reading poetry or prose from an author that you like, do you look for certain translations? Because I remember reading Celine years ago, and depending on who translated it, didn't give it a whole different meaning, but they definitely tended to clean up things like colloquialisms, and in Celine's case, they cleaned it up in general. And it just depended on what translator you read. I'm curious if you'd come across that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much difference. And you have to take the time and, compare the different translations with the original. And, I haven't done that much of that, but whenever I have, and a couple years ago, I had the a good fortune or misfortune to translate a book that someone else was translating at the exact same time, and they both came out. I mean, they both came out at the same time, and they couldn't have been more different. I mean, it was so, in that case, I knew the original so well that I was able to see just, and what it was a different perspective on what was meant. So, you know, he stressed the sort of ugliness, the crassness of things. I stressed the lyricism of things. And it was a different understanding of the text. And I think, you know, if you read his or you read mine, it's almost a completely different book. And that's the danger and the beauty of translating.
And then one other thing, and thank you for that. Sam, you just mentioned about translating as violation or the ethics of translation. That's a really interesting point. Do you mean as like betrayal of someone's personal archive, or, I mean, obviously, if you're translating, I would assume you're taking liberties with their thoughts in a way. How do you define that, and like, what's your personal problem with that?
I wouldn't say I have a problem with it. I would say that it's something that I think about and wrestle with, and it's an open and ongoing question for me. What am I doing when I'm going into an archive, when I'm taking something out of this house? When I was talking about this with brilliant dear friend Paul Holdengraber in Germany a couple weeks ago, he said to me that betrayal, what I feel as a betrayal in a way, is actually an expression of love, because in order to betray someone, you actually have to love them. And so I that's the closest I've come to, I guess, being able to define what it feels like. I feel like I'm betraying something a bit, but it's also coming from a place of that I've had of love and connection, and my own relationship to Hannah Arendt's work has changed a lot over the past 20 years since I started reading her. And I think the poems in particular made me really start to wrestle with oftentimes when I'm teaching like the origins of totalitarianism or something, people will come and say, well, do you read it in the original? And I'll be like, what? I'm like, she wrote it in English. This isn't the original. But then she rewrote it in German. She translated it from English into German. There are a couple notable exceptions to this in the body of her work. Her dissertation on Augustine, and then what was going to be the second book on Rahel Varnhagen was written in Germany, drafted in Germany before she fled. And, but she learned French when she escaped to Paris, where she spent about 8 years, and then she learned English in the course of a couple of months. And started writing. Her first 2 essays in America were written in German. But I think maybe the best illustration of this is a conversation I had with Jerry once, where he told me he killed a translation of Arendt's notebooks. I don't know if I'm supposed to share this story, but Arendt's notebooks were written in German, French, English, Hebrew, and Yiddish. She was very proud she learned Hebrew during the war and could speak Yiddish. She brags in a letter to her husband, Heinrich Blücher, that she was the only one at the World Zionist Conference who could speak Hebrew. And, to try and translate that into English is to actually undo her thinking process. The conditions of her life made her a multilingual thinker. She lived in all of these languages and thought across them. You know how you can have a conversation, or I often have conversations with friends, and the language will slip between a little, maybe a greeting in Italian and then a little a little German and then a little English, and then, we'll come back to another language. It's not that you just speak one language. She really was, she carried that, and language was so important for her. So important. Really, in many ways, everything. And she was very sensitive to what the language was expressing. And I think I had a lot of, I think I, when I had a lot of anxiety, taking on this particular project because of the richness and denseness of the language of poems in particular, and not being a native speaker. So you don't have the same register of images connected to the language. I don't, as a native speaker does. I just don't. And that's the deficit that I have, that I couldn't give to this project. I couldn't do it alone. There was no way that it could have been done in a way that I felt it deserved. It really deserved to be done. Do you want to add anything though?
Well, just that, I mean, George Steiner, his amazing book, Babel, what is it? Okay, After Babel, an incredible book about translating, and it's about language altogether. I just recommend it to anyone. It's about the way that all language is translation. But he has this idea that when you translate something, you break both the language that you're taking it out of and the one that you're and the target language, the language that you're bringing into. You break them open, but then you enrich them somehow. And I mean, it's a really, it's a beautiful idea. It's a little bit, abstract, but there's a sense that when you are doing violence of some kind to the original text, but in doing so, you're enriching the world and the language, and both the languages somehow. Yeah, and I mean, I also just think that one of the reasons why we were so happy when they agreed, the publishers agreed to put the German in, was because then you're sort of saying, look, we just did the best we could. This is an approximation.
Yeah, that was essential. And I know more about the cost of paper now than I want to know about.
Yeah.
Anna?
Yeah, thank you. I had a question about a specific poem. It's the one that starts, "The thoughts come to me, I'm no longer a stranger to them." And Samantha, you posted a translation of this in your newsletter a couple of years ago. I fell in love with that version, and then I've re-fallen in love with the version in the book. But I'm really interested in her use of the word stranger here, or the concept of the stranger. And it's been a puzzle for me, particularly in how she talks about the stranger in natality and strangers coming into the world, which struck me in reading that as kind of a strange way to think about strangers, or not always a human to human or conscious adult kind of strangeness. So I'm just wondering if the concept of the stranger, or her writing about strangers or being a stranger in other parts of her work, was part of how you thought about this poem, or not. I'm interested in hearing more if you have more to share about this poem.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me think about it in those terms now. I think I had, and there's another short poem about the book greeting us from afar that's coming to mind. But I think the language of this poem was familiar to me through Heidegger. So I think I was just, and which is the reason I included the footnote in the book, because she's taking that Heideggerian "Wir kommen nie zu Gedanken, sie kommen zu uns," around, the thoughts come, I don't come to the thoughts come to me. And I think the question of the stranger there is interesting in many different ways. I mean, Arendt would often refer to herself in Schiller's term of the girl from a foreign land. of, you know, the kind of sense of being a stranger. But I think it's also about the relationship to the material of the thought itself, and the question of where thoughts come from. And I mean, I think I read this as cultivation. You know, one can cultivate the mind, and one does not you know, the thoughts come. One does not think the thoughts. For Arendt, it was very important that thinking was not an action. It's not something that we do. We actually have to stop acting, for her, in order to think. And I think there's a question of meaning in there. What do you make of the stranger? The stranger, stranger.
Well, at first I just was thinking that, well, Goethe said, you know, es denkt in mir, it thinks in me,
Yeah.
you know, so that's a similar idea, but I mean, the stranger is the person who has a certain privileged vision. The stranger can see things that the person who comes from away is at once never fully, you know, part of the society, right? But also, so that could seem like a bad thing, but it also is a way of being able to see and maybe cross borders. But I don't know. I don't know that I really, I'm looking at it.
I think that's beautiful. I think that makes a lot of sense, because closing off of thinking is closing oneself off from the world. Right? For her, that becomes defining of totalitarianism.
So you're always, I think it's something Georg Simmel has some kind of essay or definition of the stranger, and the stranger as that extraterritorial person, the person who's free to pass and to move and to see things that other people can't see. And I'm not sure if it's him or if it's Musiel that I'm mixing up. It says that the Jew has often been that had that ability to, and the writer, and you know, the other,
Which is
the stranger.
so embracing the position of the pariah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting question. Thank you for it, Anna. Do you have an answer for it?
Me?
Yeah, just curious.
Well, I loved, maybe what I was thinking about was like thinking having such a presence that it could appear with the same kind of presence, or that her two-in-one dialogue with the self was kind of having an embodied form in the stranger. Yeah, I find it a really powerful image, like not fully giving thinking a like corporeal form, but a feeling of another, that I really like. Yeah.
And what you just said reminds me of the other poem where her hands are strange to her. She looks at her hands. You know, what are they? Are they?
Are you greater than me? Do you have higher meaning? Hands are everywhere in this collection. I've been thinking so much about the hands of poesis, the hands of the making. Hands come back over and over. Yeah. That sense of alienation. Mary?
Did she write any poetry in English?
No,
None.
she only wrote the poems in German, which is why I wrote the introduction the way that I wrote it. And when Ursula Lutz published, collected Arendt's notebooks from Marbach and published them as the 2 volumes that we have as the Denktagebuch, this was kind of before the internet was really in full, you know, I don't know, whatever, research accessibility mode. And the first 2 poems that appear chronologically in the notebooks are 2 poems from Emily Dickinson that she had copied out by hand up life's hill with my little bundle is the first one, and they were attributed to Hannah Arendt. The two Emily Dickinson poems were attributed to Hannah Arendt, which is a nice slippage in a way, because there are a couple poems in here that are very, they feel very Emily, you know, the kind of metaphysics of Emily Dickinson, I feel very present in certain places. So, but she only wrote poems in German, you know, and this was such an important, I love the moment. I mean, so the title of the book, What Remains, comes literally from, well, it occurs in one of the poems, Was bleibt, but it also comes from the 1964 interview with Gauss, where he asks her what remains for her of Germany after the war, after everything. And she says, you know, it gets translated as the language remains. She says Muttersprache, that's the mother tongue remains. And she talks a little bit, you know, and I think she takes a drag of her cigarette and she says, it's the language of German poems. It's the language of the poems I memorized in my youth that I carry around in my Hinterkopf. I'll never be able to do that again. The language of those poems that she had memorized, that she carried around, that had become part of the fabric of her thinking, had become part of her way of thinking in the world. So it's it was the language of German poems that remained for her, and she only wrote her poems in German. She said,
Did she ever translate them? Any of them?
nope.
No.
Nope.
And did she continue to write them through till the end of her life, or was it?
The last one that we have was written in 1963, shortly before she went to Jerusalem. Or 1961. Eichmann was published in 63. It's 1961, right? And there is no record of poems after that. Yeah. They really are, they're you can, I think maybe as a biographer I read them this way, but I always thought of this book in a way as a kind of autobiography, in part because it clearly marks different moments in her life, personal reflections on different moments. So she starts writing them when she goes to study with Heidegger. And then they stop when that affair ends. And then we don't have any poems until she goes to find Walter Benjamin's grave in Portbo. And then she starts writing them again in New York. And then after she returns to Germany for the first time after the war, she starts keeping her notebooks and she starts writing the poems in there. And then the last poem that we have, if it is indeed the last poem that she wrote, which I suspect it isn't, I don't think if one is inclined to write poems, they just stop. It's the last that she left in the archive that I've been able to find, I will say. And maybe many more will be found someday. But you know, I would say it's not a coincidence that those notebooks stop, that last poem stops right before she goes to Jerusalem. So you know, the trial of Eichmann really colored the rest of the work that she did for her life. From Truth in Politics to The Life of the Mind, the response she received after the publication of Eichmann really changed, I think, in some ways, the course of her writing career. Anita?
This is just a pivot back to the Paper in Flame poem and your comment about betrayal. And I'm just wondering, there's the one, and you talked about sort of two levels in another one of her poems, and there's the level of the betrayal, the ethical issues about, which leads me to wonder, were you the first person to see that poem then? Like, did you see it first?
This is this story I shall take with me to my grave. I think I've never shared the story of the progression of these things, but I will say I was not among some of the first people to find her poems and collected them before any were taken up or published or translated. So they were scattered, and some people knew they were there and existed.
Mhm.
So Jerry knew the poems that were in the archive, and he loved them. It was a really funny moment when initially when I was securing the rights through the estate, which is a whole other kind of part of the task of translating and working with estates. But I sent him 23 poems, and he wrote back to me and he's like, this is great, but you didn't translate my favorite. And so I did, and then I did like a quick and dirty translation of it and sent it back to him. He's like, okay, you can do this. He loved the poems. He really loved the poems. I wish that he could have had a copy of the book. Any other final thoughts? Do you want to say something about Musil, which I still don't pronounce properly?
I don't pronounce it properly either. It's a Czech name, so it's a little counterintuitive. But no, I was saying to Sam that there are certain overlaps, which was part of why I was so into the project. But very, very different. But one of the main things is, I think, something that Sam really brings out in her introduction and in her biography, and it's the idea of art, an aesthetic experience as an ethical realm of that needs to be kept open and needs to be kept free in order to be a full human being, and that even before we think about specific political decisions, maybe it's important to think about what's important about life and about being alive, and the relationships between people, and feeling alive. And so there's something there, and they were both defenders of that, of thinking, and the dangerousness of thinking, and the greater dangerousness of not thinking, because thinking is dangerous. And he died in 1942, but they come from very similar cultural background. So anyway,
Very timely.
indeed.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thank you so much. What an honor. Thank
I
you
hope
all for being
someday
here.
someday we'll meet in person.
Yeah. We almost have a few times.
Almost.
but,
Not
yeah.
quite. I'm looking forward to it. Thank
Me
you
too.
everyone for coming.
Thank you.
I hope you have a lovely night.
Good night.
Night.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Goodbye.
Thank you.